Hi, today is Monday the 14th of May, and this is the second of these podcasts, the first in video. The response to the first of the podcasts was phenomenal. Some people did not know that a podcast is not just a text message, but that you can actually hear the voice delivering the message, and now you can see it. Strange as it may seem to some younger listeners, this is a new technology and some persons are not familiar with its use. But I would encourage those who are now reading the text message to click onto the audio or video as you read this message. In the coming weeks, we'll try to make it simpler for you to access, and we also want to get into a regular cycle of podcasts on Monday, with it being posted by 2 p.m. and on Thursdays at the same time. Well, it's necessary to respond to Hubert Ingraham, our now Prime Minister, again, as he's returned to office, not a changed man at all, but the same old person. I've been informed that an instruction was forwarded from the Cabinet offices by his direction that all executive decisions taken by the previous government in the last 3 weeks of their time should be put on hold. This is most unwise on his part. While on the face of it, this may seem a reasonable decision, the fact is that the decisions taken lawfully should be carried out forthwith. I'm very concerned that the now Prime Minister has indicated that he stopped 100 people from being hired into the service. Again, this could only be stopping the people who were hired by the Operation Second Chance program, a program to allow entry-level workers with no or little qualifications to come into the service. It was a carefully thought out and developed program, properly funded, and reversed a long-standing and bad decision of both governments to have a moratorium on hiring in the public service. A moratorium was put in place by Mr. Ingraham when he left the government the last time in 2002. And the PLP foolishly followed that policy and ended up out of government, with the number one complaint from the electorate being lack of jobs, not crime or immigration as it was in the summer of 2006. And this is the great irony, because there is virtually full employment in the country and unemployment is at almost record lows. But still, the number one complaint was lack of jobs. And this affected unskilled workers who wanted to get into the public sector. The Inter-American Development Bank, in one of its studies, told us that a moratorium is a bad idea. It is a blunt instrument and does not accomplish the savings that governments think. While it is catchy politically, it causes serious problems in the service in that the needs that are required cannot be met, and you end up having in the end to take emergency measures to fill the gaps. For example, at one time, there was an emergency need to hire scores of janitresses and janitors into the service because the moratorium had stripped the schools of all of these employees. Further, each year the service ought to get its share of the people from each birth cohort or age group. This keeps the service up to date with the latest talent and ideas and helps to renew the service. Because of the moratorium, there is something like a 4-year gap of employees that has to be filled. What is so wrong about Mr. Ingraham's present decision is that it affects adversely the people at the lowest rung of the ladder, that is, the poorest people. These are the young men and women who have just come out of high school, who've been unable to find work in the private sector in the main, who are unskilled, who don't have the requisite qualifications, and who I saw had their lives transformed by jobs that paid just over $200 a week. Why would Mr. Ingraham deny this benefit to them and the country and their families? It is mean, mean-spirited, but entirely keeping with his philosophy. The 800-pound gorilla has spoken. There are others who are going to suffer as well. The officers of the Civil Aviation Department, who were granted a $12,000 per annum certification allowance after careful negotiations and consideration. The Customs and Immigration officers, who were granted a special shift allowance. Numerous individuals who give good service to the government by contract, but whose contracts had expired, some of whom had been working month to month, awaiting signatures on those contracts. the retired prison officers who were granted their pensions that had been unlawfully taken away from them by the Ingram administration prior to 2002. They were restored by the PLP. Now that decision has been put on hold as well. The road traffic officers who were granted a settlement of their dispute following their dismissal, some of them were to rejoin the service. That decision has been put on hold by Mr. Ingram. So while Mr. Ingram is reviewing, these people are suffering and the proverbial horse is starving. I urge him to resile from his position and carry out the lawful decisions of the previous government. Surely, hatred and politics should not go that far. Mr. Ingram has brought the politics of hatred back into the fore. In contrast, one has only to remember that the F&M administration hired 300 people just before the elections in 2002 on 3-month contracts. It was clearly calculated to bring short-term political gain. So when the 3 months were up, then they had to be let go. The hires in 2007 of the PLP are permanent and pensionable, permanently on the establishment. And we had to make a decision as a government in 2002, when those 3-month contracts were up, to keep those persons on the service, because that was the humane thing to do. Not so with Mr. Ingram today. This, then, in 2007, hiring people on the permanent pensionable was not a short-term fix. Now, Mr. Ingram, with his executive decision to put all of these things on hold, has ruined the lives of these individuals who expected to come, and those who are now on the payroll think that at any moment they will be fired. This is wrong. As for the PLP itself, I wish to ask all supporters to hold your heads up high. The F&M is the first minority government in the country since 1962. That does not strip them of the legal authority to govern, but they must always have regard for the rights of the PLP and the majority of people who oppose them in the country. That will be the job of all of us who were elected to Parliament and all citizens who love their country. As we think back on the election, there are several questions we must ask. Where was the church that was so courted by the PLP and its leaders throughout the 5 years? It was as if they went absolutely silent, allowing scurrilous accusations, sleaze, vote buying, and intimidation by the F&M, and stood by while a man who paid no attention to them, who insulted them for much of the past 5 years, was able, with their blessing, it appears, to walk back into office. Interesting. The first day of rebuilding started for the PLP when the election was lost on Wednesday, the 2nd of May, a day that will live in infamy. A sad day for this country, but there is always opportunity in some mishap, and the idea is not to mope about it, but to work and work until we are back. Next time, I'd like to talk about national health insurance. But before ending, there was a matter that was brought to my attention that was written about me in the Tribune by an Englishman who I will not dignify by calling his name. It is well known that he cavorts with people who are next to scum, and he should not be in this country. Please be advised that whatever you read with regard to me in those columns is patently false and is a total figment of that writer's lying imagination. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.